Okay, it's a real honor for us to invite for the second time today Mohammad Darawshe to talk to us about Arab citizens of Israel between Palestinian national identity and Israeli civic identity. He was talking with us and discussing a little bit about this earlier today with many of our students and doing a wonderful job. And after viewing a documentary called Children of Peace. So we're in for really for a wonderful analysis and wonderful opportunity to have a great discussion with someone that during a time of war that we're tragically in has done so much work in the past to try to further equality within Israel and to build kind of a more peaceful society and so forth. So you're a wonderful person to provide some hope during these times. Mohammad Darawshe is the director of Center for Equality and Shared Society at Givat Haviva in Israel. He's also a faculty member of the Shalom Hartman Institute and an expert on national minorities at the European Council in Strasbourg. And currently he is a visiting scholar at the Illinois Global Institute at the State University of Illinois, and was also a visiting scholar at Ludwig Maximillian University in Munich. He has a BA from the Hebrew University, an MA in Peace and Conflict Studies from Haifa University, and is currently working on his PhD in Teaching and Learning Strategies at An-Najah National University. He's a leading expert on Jewish-Arab relations and has presented lectures all over the world at many prestigious forums. So it's a real honor to have someone who's dedicated his life in this way to moving things in the right direction, especially at this time. We're really honored to have you with us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Yael, and thank you for inviting me and all the sponsoring institutions that are behind bringing me and my wife, Khawla, here. We took a long drive from Champaign-Urbana this morning to here. So it was a good way to see the cornfields and a little bit of the changing colors of the trees. I see some trees there beginning to change colors. Our subject matter is the Arab citizens in Israel, but when we use that terminology, it opens a Pandora box. Professor Tamar Herman from the Israel Democracy Institute, and she's now also at Tel Aviv University, she does a study every year that asks Arab citizens in Israel, how do you define yourselves? And she gets 17 different variations. 7 of them are what we call singular identities. People that would define themselves only as Arab, or only as Israeli, or only as Palestinian, or only as Muslim, or only as Christian, or only as Druze, or only as Bedouin. So you have 7 different variations of what we call singular identities, but only 28% subscribe to singular identities. The remaining 72% use what we call hyphenated identities, with a combination of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 identities. So you can be both Palestinian and Israeli and an Arab and a Muslim, okay, or any other combination. This is a description of a community in transition that does not yet have stable identity. Many factors are trying to compete in the formulation of the final status identity. And this is what I want to discuss with you. 2 very dominant identities that are obvious there are the Israeli and Palestinian identity. Almost 60% use the term Israel in self-definition, whether in singular plus hyphenated. They integrate the term Israel, which is not that easy for many in the past, but has become more regular use in the last 2 to 3 decades. So what we call the Israelization process of the Arab citizens. And about 60% also use the term Palestine. Palestinian Israeli, or Palestinian citizen, but you get a group that has this combination of both being Israeli and Palestinian at the same time. making distinction between Palestinian as the national identity versus Israeli as the civic identity, which is a bit difficult for American audiences because your civic identity is American and your national identity is American. In Israel, we have distinction between the civic identity, which is Israeli, and the national identity of the state, which is Jewish. And if you're not Jewish, you're not part of the national identity of the state. There's a gap, there's a delta that leaves you outside the national identity of the state. So these two main trends of Israelization and re-Palestinization are the subject matter of our talk today. But before we delve into analyzing today, I'd like to go back on what made this creature. And I don't want to make it a history class, but more of the development of the ethnic and national and civic identity of Arab citizens. What are the factors or what are the incidents that made it what it is today? So I don't think it's confusion. The fact that Arab citizens define themselves as Palestinians and Israelis at the same time, this is not confusion. Actually, I would characterize it as more of realistic identity that is trying to talk with the different factors that are imposing themselves and affecting Arab citizens. But let's go back to the beginning of the story. That's the 15th of May, 1948. 14th of May, 1948, the draft of the Declaration of Independence. And it has two specific references to Arab citizens. One, we call, quote, we call on the children of the Arab nation to stay and be part of the prosperity and development of the State of Israel. The interesting two words are children of the Arab nation. Arab nation. So the national identity was seen by the founders of the state as an Arab national identity. They didn't call it Palestinian. They called it Arab national identity, children of the Arab nation. And the term Arab was prominent, but it is a collective description of the people that stayed in what became the State of Israel. There was a collective identity that was given to describe this population as children of the Arab nation. The second reference is on the basically rules of engagement. How would this population engage with Israeli society? And there were two promises, political equality and social equality. The promise to my grandfather's generation, if you stay and be part of the prosperity and development, actually not only that, if you surrender arms, and that's what all Arab towns did in mostly June, July. Those that did not surrender were forced to leave, and many were killed in the process or evacuated and became refugees. But 156,000, I would even characterize them as leftovers of the Palestinian people, stayed and accepted this promise in the Declaration of Independence. These two aspects, realizing that you will be a minority in the state of the Jewish people. It's obvious in the Declaration of Independence that you're seen as a collective, but you're promised at the same time political equality and social equality. For some reason, the founding fathers chose to make that distinction between political equality and social equality. It's a discourse that was started then. I don't know the exact details why they made that distinction between political equality and social equality, but it's a discourse that is still accompanying us till today. Today, most Israeli Jews are more easy to talk about social equality, having more of a problem to talk about political equality. Most Arab citizens are focused on political equality and less on social equality. It's a debate of expectations. Most Arab citizens say, by the way, we want both political and social equality. Most Israeli Jewish citizens say, let's settle for social equality. You'll get equal services, equal budgets, equal access to jobs, but politically remember, this is not your state. This is the state of the Jewish people. So this debate was very heated until the 19th of July, 2018, when Israel came and said, let's have no confusion. nation-state law that was passed as a basic law, constitutional status law. It says Israel is the state of the Jewish people, meaning it's not the state of the Israelis. It's a state of 79% of the population of the state of Israel who are Jewish, plus the Jewish diaspora, those that live here or anywhere else. Israel is their state, and it's not the state of the 100% Israelis. So there are three stakeholders. When we talk about the state of Israel, there are three stakeholders in the discourse. The Jewish population in Israel, the Jewish diaspora, that the state says I'm theirs, and the Arab population in Israel. These are the three stakeholders that are fighting on this cake, which the discourse, I call it, whose state is it? Is it the state of the Jews, or is it the state of the Israelis, or is it the state of both groups? Which actually makes it three stakeholders in the process. If it's the state of the Jews, then I'm out. If it's the state of the Israelis, then Jewish diasporas are out. Can the state be a state of three subgroups? Actually, there are many. I spent a whole year in 2016 studying the issue of national minorities in Europe, the mother of nation states. And most of those countries did make a fix of this bug of nation states. Nation states know how to give the status of national minority to other national groups that live in that country, which is a problem for Israel till now, meaning providing collective rights. What is the recognition of national minority? It's the provision of collective rights to a group that has different national or ethnic identity. Yet I'm not very honest with you, because de facto, Israel has been giving to Arab citizens collective rights, but never packaging them as part of an agreement with Arab citizens. In Europe, the 23 officially recognized minorities, they got their status as an officially recognized national minority as a result of an agreement between the representatives of that minority with the government, with the federal governments. And they gave them that protection to the arrangement that protects their language, their culture, and sometimes even giving them autonomy, geographic autonomy, or cultural autonomy, or linguistic autonomy, or certain services, or tax collection, you name it. There's no one size fits all in the 23 different minorities in Europe. Every country made its own arrangements. Israel made its own arrangements without consulting with the Arab citizens. And that's the missing component. The consultation and the formal packaging. Are there collective rights to Arab citizens? Let's look at some of them. One is recognizing Arabic as an official language of the state, which was the case until the 19th of July 2018, 19th of July 2018, when the nation state law took that out. So Arabic was an official language. It dropped from being an official language. Now it's considered special language. So the official language is Hebrew, and Arabic is the only non-Hebrew language that is considered special language in Israel. So English is not considered special. Nothing else is considered special. So if you take a bill, monetary bill, you see Arabic written on it. It's part of giving Arabic a certain status, which is unique to it's some kind of a dialogue with Arab community saying your language counts. It's not official, but it still counts. It's on the bills, on the monetary bills. If you look at the website of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, you see an Arabic translation of it. You look at the Prime Minister's office, there's also translation of Arabic language, but it's not official anymore. So there was downgrading of that collective right, which recognized Arab citizenship, Arab language as an official language. It was downgraded. Another collective right provided to Arab citizens is exemption from military service. All Israelis at the age of 18 have to go to the military. You have to get summoned to the military. You get an order to go to the military, but Arab citizens are exempted from this. One segment of the Arab citizens, who are about 8.5%, who are the Druze, made a different arrangement in the 50s, and their leadership wanted to enlist in the military service because that would be a faster path for them into integration and equality. And actually, they thought in terms of being a minority within a minority might be problematic. So they lined up with the majority population, with the Jewish community. They didn't want to be seen as part of the minority in the Arab community, which is a minority in the state of Israel. So their strategy was to line up with the majority, which is, by the way, a strategy of the Druze population in most of the Middle East. You see that also with the Circassian population, whether they are in Israel or in Jordan or in other countries. Usually very small minorities line up and with the ruling majority to try to get some kind of protection from other groups in society. But the rest of the Arab community, mostly the 83% Muslim and the other 8.5% Christian, did not enlist in the military. And they liked the fact that they get this exemption because it exempts them from having to face their brethren, their Palestinian brethren. The Arab citizens, as I said, are leftovers of the Palestinian people. That creates a problem when your state is at war with your people, and with a frequency of wars every few years, it puts you in a very uncomfortable situation. So the arrangement of exemption from military service prevents Arab citizens from having to be in direct confrontation with their own people. At the same time, I was speaking yesterday with an Israeli journalist called Nadav, and he said, actually, this is also a good arrangement for Israel. Because as long as there is a problem of mistrust between Israel and its Arab citizens, no one wants to see 100,000 Arab citizens with machine guns. Why 100,000? Every year the Arab community increases by about 34,000. And if you take 3 years of people serving in the military, that's about 100,000 people. So to have 100,000 people with a problem of trust between the state and that community well equipped with machine guns is not such a good idea from the perspective of the majority. From the perspective of the minority, we don't have to face our cousins, especially when one of the main missions of the Israeli military is exercising occupation for the last, how many years? Since 1967. And many of the Arab citizens in Israel have family relationship with Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, either because of historic reasons or as a result of cross-green line marriage. Since 1967 till today, 35,000 cross-green line marriages took place, which makes almost 20% of the Arab population with an immediate family member across the Green Line in the West Bank or Gaza. Almost 20% of the Arab community have first kin or cousin, I don't know, you call it second cycle, a cousin, but cousin and someone that has immediate family relationship who lives in the West Bank and Gaza, which is the re-Palestinization process that actually started in 1967. But before I go into that, I want to try to continue with you the discourse about the Israelization process. Part of the Israelization process was not a very happy story. On the 5th of October, 1948, Israel decided to change its mind. The invitation that was granted in the Declaration of Independence, stay and be part of the prosperity of the State of Israel and promised political and social equality, that was put into some kind of a freezing conditions. Why? Because Israel did not calculate properly the amount of Arab citizens that stayed or wanted to stay. 156,000 was a bit too much. So they said, let's assume that there will be another big war coming up in a year or two. The Arab armies will get organized and probably attack Israel. And this will create an opportunity for population exchange. We'll get the Jews from Arab countries and we'll get rid of the leftovers of the Palestinians. The mechanism to do that was to prevent the integration of Arab citizens in Israeli society. The tool was enforcing military administration on all Arab towns and villages throughout Israel. Basically, some kind of a martial rule that prevented Arab citizens from leaving their towns and villages, whether it is for social interaction with people from other villages or employment, but mainly to prevent their integration in the larger Israeli Jewish society. Part of it was also an attempt to try to take over the lands. And you didn't want people going around and farming their lands when you're trying to grab them. So you prevent people from coming to their land, and you announce that land as closed military zone. And after 3 years, if you haven't harvested it, then the state has the right to take it. So part of it was also part of the scheme to confiscate the lands by preventing people from cultivating their lands, and then using this old Turkish law that if you did not harvest it for 3 years, the state has the authority to take it from you. But the idea was that this process of military administration was a temporary process, that it would last for maybe 6 to 12 months until the war happens, and then you create that opportunity for population exchange, reduce the number from 156,000 to what they called a manageable number. No one actually spelled out what's a manageable number, but that was the idea, to drop the number to a manageable number. A big war never happened. By the late 50s, almost all the Jews from Arab countries have already come to Israel. There was no one to actually negotiate with. None of the Arab countries has entered any peace or war relations that would create a dialogue about population exchange. And Israel was facing a very significant internal legal problem of what to do with your own citizens that are kept under military law. It's a temporary situation that you can do during crisis periods or emergency periods, but you cannot continue it for a long time, especially if you want to call yourself a democracy. If you want to, and the Knesset started passing laws that spelled out the democratic nature of the state, meaning freedom of movement, while you're limiting people, freedom of employment, while you're limiting people, access to universities, access to jobs, all kinds of problems started creating a very clear tension between the military administration together with the civil rights laws that were being passed in the Knesset. So in 1963, the Knesset decided to lift the military administration. They called it then the Arab problem. And they said that the solution for the Arab problem is to integrate Arab citizens in Israel, exactly as the founding fathers decided to do. Let's start the Israelization process. So they decided to lift the military administration gradually. So it took until 1966 to finish the process of the civic relationship, to start the civic relationship and not the military relationship between the Arab minority and the state. That was a period, the result was freedom of movement, freedom of employment, accessing universities, beginning to get some budgets from government ministries, whether it is to link the towns with electricity, with water. So the beginning of the Israelization process was actually modernization. So it felt good. It's usually when, I call it the adoption process. Usually when you adopt a child, you try to give him a lot of gifts so that they tend to like you. And you want those gifts because you didn't have any before, if you were orphan. You come from usually background of being nowhere. And that was exactly the place in which Arab citizens were. They were not welcomed as Israelis until 1966. So they did not have a state. And they were in the Arab world related to Arab citizens as traitors for accepting Israeli citizenship. So we did not have a nation. So no state, no nation. I wrote an article about this once. I called it being politically orphans. So that your nation calls you traitor for remaining in the enemy land and accepting their citizenship, sleeping with the enemy. And your state says, actually, you're an extension of the enemy. Your fifth column will treat you as potential suspects because you are Palestinians and you're left, and you might do something in support of the Palestinian national interests against the state interests. So this dilemma accompanied Arab citizens, actually still accompanies Arab citizens till today. But it created a phenomenon which we call it double marginality. Marginal in the Palestinian Arab scene and marginal in the Israeli Jewish scene. And that double marginality started creating a third creature. And that third creature is the hyphenated identity, is those combinations that we're trying to figure out what identity we're in. So the Israelization process started in the mid-60s, 1966, and it was something to celebrate for Arab citizens. Finally, the political orphan gets adopted. They get a lot of welcome packages, a lot of opportunities. 1967 comes, the war with all Arab countries, and the only Arab subgroup that did not lose the war was the Arab citizens of Israel, because we were not part of the war. So the defeat of the Arab armies enhanced the Israelization process. Then we started comparing ourselves to the status of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza under occupation, under military occupation, meaning that they have no political rights, we do. They have no social rights, we do. They have no movement rights, we do. They have no employment rights, we do. They have no social services, we do. So comparing ourselves to other Palestinians meant that being Israeli paid. It was worthwhile, which created tension between the Arab citizens in Israel and the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. That saw us more as sellouts and traitors. For welfare and for certain kinds of freedoms, you're willing to abandon your Palestinianhood. So the beginning of that relationship was a tense relationship on the Palestinian front, and that tension enhanced the Israelization process. We wanted to be more similar to the Israeli Jewish society. That wanting to be similar, in Arabic we have a saying, with food comes appetite. So sometimes you get to eat and you're not hungry, but you taste it and it tastes good, so you develop an appetite. So with the Israelization process, we developed an appetite. We wanted more. Not just nice handouts of, allow 20 Arab students to enter university, get an access road to one of the villages, or connect us to water. What about equality? So the term equality started evolving in the 70s, saying we want to be equal to the Jewish citizens. If citizenship means something, let's go to the original founding document of the relationship, which is the Declaration of Independence. It speaks about equality. In the Jewish community, they were talking about coexistence. Let's coexist. Let's have good relations. Coexistence, I said that earlier also, can be also between a horse and a rider, where you have hierarchy. So you can enjoy each other's company while maintaining hierarchy. So in the Jewish community, they said, let's coexist, but keep the distance and keep the hierarchy. The Arab community said, no. First of all, we want equality, then coexistence. Let's fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence. Failing to do that started creating tension. And that tension broke in a very volatile event, which is on the 30th of March, 1976. It's called Land Day demonstrations. For the first time, Arab citizens dared to demonstrate on a civic issue, against the policy of confiscation of lands of Arab citizens. By then, we have lost almost 56% of the lands that we owned in 1948, and the ownership of land has gotten reduced from 56% of the overall land to 3.5% of the land in the country, which meant change in our social economic well-being. We were landowners, farming our own lands, being very independent in our economic well-being, and now all of those lands are turned to the nearby kibbutzim and mushavim, and we became day laborers, sometimes in our own lands, barely making enough to bring food to the table. So poverty became a very significant problem in the Arab community. It's still a very significant problem. 46% of Arab citizens are below poverty line today in Israel. In the Jewish community, it's less than 8%. And it's an accumulated institutional poverty, intentional poverty, that was made by the state. It's not as a result of living in a poor culture or wanting to be in a poor culture. I'll come back later about the most recent trends and how they're evolving and changing the economic scene in the Arab community. But that tension around the issue of land was basically saying that this adopted orphan is saying to their adopting parent, treat us as well as you treat your biological child. Who's the biological child of the state of Israel? The Jewish population. Treat us as equal as your biological children. We want to be treated as Israeli Jews and not be treated as military subjects as the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. So we're comparing ourselves with the Palestinians and saying they're not citizens, we are. And as citizens, we're comparing ourselves with the Jewish population. So that the topic of equality started with land, but then other issues started getting accumulated. The term equality started evolving from just social economic needs or material needs into political needs. There's debate today, for example, about the flag. The flag of the state of Israel is a very Jewish symbol, very exclusively Jewish symbol. The national anthem, which is very exclusively Jewish symbol. National holidays are very exclusively Jewish Zionist symbols. And Arab citizens say, where are we there? So if we are to continue Israelization, the Israeli identity needs to expand to become more inclusive and less exclusive. Now, this is a problem because Israeli Jewish society and Israeli national identity feels under attack, and it's always in the defense of its Jewish identity. So it's not able to create space for anything other than the Jewish identity in those public assets, flag, national anthem, public holidays, or the culture of Israeli society. So when you get a pushback in the land day, basically the police killed 6 Arab citizens, and basically it was a pushback saying, here is a glass ceiling for your Israelization. There are certain issues that have a national interest in which you're not part of. While lands were being confiscated for a simple policy that was called Judaization. Judaizing the Galilee was the policy, and Judaizing the Galilee meant take out the lands from Arab citizens and create Jewish outposts that develop into towns later. And in order to encourage Jewish migration over there, which by the way is happening now in the Negev, in the south, in the Bedouin community, affecting the land issues of the Bedouin population in the south. So if you want to create a town like Carmel, and in the north, in the Galilee, you need to convince people to come and live there, Jewish population. You give them large space, you give them fast roads. The train stops only in that Jewish town, doesn't stop on the way in Arab towns, in order to give them fast access to public transportation that takes them into the center. You create jobs for them. All the factories are encouraged to open their factories and create jobs to the Jewish community. And the Arab community experiences that as discrimination. Because the settlement of Jewish citizens in the Galilee, which is a national Jewish interest / national Israel interest, is only provided to the Jewish population. Those Jewish towns were getting, still actually till today, are getting what's called national priority status, which gives them taxation benefits. So you get tax cuts or incentives. Like, for example, Intel opened a plant and offices and a development center in Kiryat Gat in the south. And in order to encourage them to do that, the state gives them the land for free and about half of the cost of the building, and they exempt them from paying taxes for about 10 years, and they give the employees also tax cut for the first few years. That's an incentives that the state knows how to give to encourage corporations to open their factories in Jewish towns. Not a single time or a single incident that the state encouraged an outside investor, whether it's an Israeli or an international investor, to create a factory in an Arab town. So that is experienced by the Arab citizens as discrimination. Suddenly this orphan discovers that the adopting parent is not so loving. So what do? You turn to the other parent. Who's the other parent who's now handy and easy and accessible? It's the Palestinian identity. And it starts a process which we call re-Palestinization. The glass ceiling that was discovered on Land Day, that your Israelization on certain issues can never be complete, because Judaizing the Galilee at your expense is Israeli national interest, and it does not serve your interest as an Israeli citizen. You realize that there is a glass ceiling for your completion of identity. You can never be equal in your Israeli identity. So if your mother doesn't love you enough, you go to your father. And the father in this case was handy. It was our Palestinian identity. And you can definitely mark 30th of March 1976 as the beginning of re-Palestinization. Initially, it started before. I would call it more social re-Palestinization. I mentioned the cross-green line marriages. It usually happened with families of the two sides that got disconnected in 1948, and now the way they re-engage as family by marrying cousins from the two sides to reconnect the family together. But with time, this phenomena becomes much, much bigger. Then there's economic re-Palestinization. To go shopping in West Bank towns is easier for Arab citizens than to go shopping in Israeli Jewish towns. One, because the products there are cheaper. Second, they're more tuned to your taste, whether it's the spices you buy, or the clothes you buy, or the furniture you buy. It's made to your culture, but also cultural consumption, other cultural consumption. You go to theater, you go to music, and slowly it becomes political re-Palestinization. So it starts with social, goes through economic, and moves into political re-Palestinization. The political re-Palestinization goes back to this marginality in Israeli society. So you want to hang in with an identity in which you are less marginal. And the re-engagement with Palestinian national identity gave the Arab citizens a breathing space that we can aspire to become part of a nation. Because in Israel, we cannot be part of the Israeli nation, because the Jewish population does not want to create an Israeli nation. They want to create a Jewish nation in Israel, but not an Israeli nation. So we want to be part of a nation. What is that nation? It's the mother nationality. It's the Palestinian national identity, which started talking to us, initially trying to recruit us to support the Palestinian national project, which is liberation of Palestine, end occupation, trying to join the resistance, and not many actually did. Very few did. The most famous is the poet Mohammad Darawshe, who was an Israeli citizen, lived in a town called Jdeida, and at some point he felt that the Israeli citizenship is too narrow for him, and he wanted out, and he went and joined the PLO in Lebanon and became the most famous Palestinian national poet. His poetry has become the iconic poetry of Palestinian nationalism. But the massive majority stayed. Who left actually between 1948 and the mid-70s? It was mostly the elite, the political elite that felt that being Israeli is treason. So the cultural elite that could not comprehend being part of the enemy state. But also the academic elite, not necessarily academic, but also even if you had a high school diploma, you could become a teacher in one of the Gulf countries, which were developing very quickly, and they were asking for brain power. So we suffered very quick brain drain. Everyone that has ability to become a kindergarten teacher or school teacher and found a job in Gulf countries. But also economic drain, because everyone that had few gold coins and thought that they can start and be better in other countries, they packed and left, and especially going to Jordan or to European or Western countries. So the leftover, when I use the term leftovers, I really mean the leftovers. We were left without political leadership, without social leadership, without cultural leadership, without economic leadership. And it took few generations for the Arab community to rebuild a concept of leadership. And that was not easy, especially with a state that is saying, we don't see you as leadership. The only good Arab then was the Arab that voted to Zionist political parties, especially Mapam and Mapai, the government parties. And there were more than 85% of the Arab citizens that voted for those parties. Believe me, not as a result of love for Ben Gurion or for the leaders of Mapam, but mostly because this was the only way to get some freedoms, some benefits, like to get a permit to even to go to hospital or visit your fiancé in another town during the military administration. You needed, in Arabic we call it wasta. You needed some good connection, someone that has connections. And who are the people that had connections? It was the political people that are politically connected with the government. And those were the political parties that would give you something in exchange for votes, especially for the tribal leaders that were able to trade some individual personal benefits in exchange for political pay that they gave during elections period. Today, the political scene is very different. 88% of Arab citizens vote to Arab political parties. Just until 1999 elections, it was about 50-50%. Today, it's 88% that vote to Arab political parties. So the sense of separation from the national political parties is becoming much, much more obvious by the change of terminology from coexistence into equality. So those parties, Mapam and the Labour Party later and other parties, Meretz even, promised equality, but they delivered coexistence. So they promised to bring about equality, but then they actually focus more on good relations. Let's focus on good relations. Come to celebrate Jewish holidays. We come to eat with you during the month of Ramadan. It's what we call the social contact theory, to engage in social contact, but maintain the hierarchy, maintain the discriminatory reality. Now, many would argue, is there discrimination or no discrimination? I will bring two topics here. One is a statement, and the second is some facts. The statement is a quote from something called the Orr Commission report. It's a government commission that was founded in the year 2001 to investigate the events of October 2000, which left 13 Arab citizens killed in the hands of the Israeli police. And the government created this commission called the Orr Commission, headed by Supreme Court Justice Theodore Orr, to investigate what happened. How come the state kills 13 Arab citizens within a week for committing a crime, and the crime was throwing stones on passing cars? But that crime gets committed almost every Friday afternoon in Jewish ultra-religious neighborhoods that try to prevent cars from driving through the neighborhoods during Shabbat. Because if you drive on Shabbat, on a Jewish holiday, it desecrates the Shabbat, it desecrates the holiday. And the way they try to resist that, the Haredi population, they throw stones at passing cars. No one gets shot, no one gets killed, and barely gets arrested. While when an Arab citizen throws a stone at a passing car, you get shot by a sniper from a distance of 300 yards. So it's not a police officer that feels that their life is in danger or they try to protect another citizen, and that's why they try to prevent a crime that might be of immediate danger. But all the 13 people were killed by snipers from the distance. So there was a demand from the Arab community to create an investigation committee. And that commission resulted, by the way, this is your reading material for tonight, the summation of the Orr Commission report. It's only 28 pages in English. If you want to read the Hebrew version, it's 3,000 pages. But the English version is 28 pages. Google it, the summation of the Or Commission report. But in the report, they say, we, the State of Israel, have been institutionally and deliberately discriminating against our Arab citizens. If I would have said that before the year 2003 when the report was published, I would probably be called Israel bashing or maybe anti-Semitic. But suddenly you get a formal government investigation commission that says we, the State of Israel, they speak in the term we, because it's a government commission report, and the government accepted the report. They didn't ask to change the language of the report. We are guilty of exercising institutional and deliberate discrimination. Now, I think you teach in psychology. I think one of the lessons I once heard about psychology is that before you start treatment, you need to get the patient to the stage that they admit that they are sick. It's you come to the stage you get out of denial. And Israel actually got out of denial of exercising institutional and deliberate discrimination. Many in psychology, this is half of the treatment. To admit that you are sick is half of the treatment. Then you start with the treatment. And actually the third chapter of the Or Commission drafts the future treatment proposed. They say this negates Israel's national interest. And they started introducing new terminology, not coexistence, but actually going back not only to the term equality, but they institutionalized a new term which is called corrective discrimination. So it's not only that we look back and we say we've been institutionally and deliberately discriminating against our Arab citizens. They also say the cure is corrective discrimination. Does that remind you of an American term? Affirmative action. So they say affirmative action is the path forward. And they also use the term equal integration of Arab citizens. That's also a new term that was introduced by the Or Commission. I think of them as the Third Testament, new Bible that was produced, that is supposed to draft the rules of engagement, the rules of the way Jewish-Arab relations should be formulated in the future. And now we're in debate between implementation and lack of implementation. Now, as every good thing, it brings in knee-jerk reaction. The knee-jerk reaction was the nation-state law, by the right wing capturing a moment, saying, no, equal integration is not possible. Let's look for maybe some social economic progress, but political retreat. So the political status of Arab citizens since 2009, under the watch of Benjamin Netanyahu for the last 15 years, resulted with 28 discriminatory laws, which makes discrimination more of de jure discrimination, legal discrimination, and not just de facto discrimination. Most of the discrimination until 2009 was mostly de facto discrimination. People acting against the spirit of the law, which is the Declaration of Independence. It's referred to in Israel as the spirit of the law. So if you discriminate, you are acting against the spirit of the law, but also against 7 other laws that speak about protection of freedom of expression, freedom of movement, and so on and so on. But now we have in the Book of Laws 28 laws that have discriminatory nature. Among them is the Nakba law, for example, which says you cannot teach the Palestinian narrative in Arab schools. You can teach it in Jewish schools. You can go to a Jewish school and teach it in Hebrew. You can be an Arab citizen that teaches Jewish citizens about the Palestinian narrative of 1948, and that's perfectly legal. You cannot go to an Arab school and teach it in Arabic. You can't even bring a Jewish teacher to teach about the Nakba in an Arab school. That's illegal. The school would lose 30% of its budget. Another law is the citizenship law of who can naturalize a spouse. I mentioned that there was a lot of cross-green line marriages. This is no more legal. You cannot naturalize a spouse if your spouse is Palestinian from the West Bank, Gaza, or from Jordan, or even if they are of Palestinian descent that live in Michigan. They cannot be naturalized, which means preventing Arab citizens from being able to marry any other person who's of Palestinian descent. The idea behind that was to limit the potential demographic growth of Arab citizens, to limit the size of the Arab community so that they cannot bring in additional non-Jews into the Israeli citizenship. That's the idea behind it. By the way, many refer to Arab citizens as a demographic bomb in Israel, that there's growth in the Arab community that can challenge the Jewish demographic majority inside the state of Israel. This was maybe true until about 8 years ago. 8 years ago, the balance started tipping in the opposite direction. The birth rate among the Jewish population today is about 3.2% a year. Among Arab citizens, it's 3.1%. It's lower birth rate than the Jewish community. It's a result of the modernization that I mentioned earlier. It's a result of lacking resources mostly for housing. People don't know where to put their kids. Traditionally we build houses, low houses, not high rises, and people don't have enough land to build a house for their children or for their grandchildren, and the prices become much more, very, very expensive. The price of a lot in my village, which is at the end of nowhere, is pretty much the price of a lot in Herzlia, which is one of the most expensive towns in the Jewish community. And I'm talking about a Jewish town, an Arab town way up north that there's no value for the market in the Israeli scene. There's no value for the land, but there's so little land within the community that the prices climb up very, very, very high. Result of the confiscation policy that I mentioned earlier. So now you have a community that walks two paths. One is Israelization, and the other is re-Palestinization. And there are a few stations that challenged these two paths. One of them was the Oslo Agreements. The Oslo Agreements in the 90s between Israel and the PLO were between our father and our mother, between our national leadership and our civic leadership. And we assumed that our case will be on the negotiations table. As, by the way, the case of almost all national minorities in Europe were recognized as national minorities as a result of cross-border agreement between two neighboring countries, and the mother nation would negotiate the status of the national minority. So Austria negotiated the status of the German-speaking minority in South Tyrol, which is in northern Italy. Napoleon, if you remember, negotiated the status of the French in Switzerland. He fabricated this structure called Switzerland just to protect the French minority. Denmark negotiated the status of the Danes in Germany. Germany negotiated the status of the Silesians who are Germans in Poland. Usually the mother nation negotiates the status of their leftovers, children in another nation, because they don't want to do ethnic cleansing. So they try to negotiate with the host civic country the status of the national minority. The problem of Arab citizens is that the Palestinians were negotiating their freedom, independence, and nothing with the Arab citizens. So if you read the Oslo Agreements, about 4,000 pages, you go through the Oslo Agreements, one page after the other, one chapter after the other, 4,000 pages, you look for the paragraphs that talk about Arab citizens, what do you find? Nothing. Zero mention of the Arab population. They talk about East Jerusalem, who are 4% of the population in Israel, but the 17% Arab citizens, who also happen to be 17% of the Palestinians around the world, no one talks about them. They talk about refugees. So Palestinian refugee that lives in Lebanon or lives in Syria or lives in Europe, they talk about their right to come, limited right, and live in the West Bank for first generation Palestinians. It was never signed, but at least it was part of the negotiations. In the document called the Taba White Paper, the Taba non-papers, because they came up with an agreement that also talked about the refugees, but they never signed it. But you look at the whole process between 1992 until 2001, when the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations pretty much ended, not Israel and not the Palestinian leadership, none of them brought the issue of the Arab citizens in Israel on the negotiations table. So I read the Oslo agreements in Arabic, Hebrew, and English. Believe me, it's not the same text. Depends where you put the and all, or just territories, or that territories. It allows a great deal of confusion depending on which text you read. But there's no confusion about the text that relates to Arab citizens because it's no text. Now, my undergraduate degree is in English literature and political science. Professor Alice Shalvi, who taught me English literature, she used to say to me, when you read the text, read the subtext. Read what did the author choose to omit. She called it the power of omission. And I think I learned from her more politics from literature than I learned from political science. So what's the power of omission in dropping out the discussion about the status of Arab citizens in Israel? So on the receiving end of this topic, as a subject of this omission, I look at it and I say, maybe I thought I'm always part of the problem, but I'm not part of the solution. When they come to speak about the creation of a Palestinian state, the borders envisioned will be the West Bank and Gaza, the green line, with 3% correction, without 3%, with 7% correction, without 7% correction. But whatever you talk about corrections, the Palestinian state will end at the green line in the West Bank and Gaza. That's what the Palestinian leadership accepted, with the encouragement of the leadership of the Arab world, which accepted the notion of a two-state solution also in the Arab League initiative. And they said, if Palestine is to be created, and hopefully Palestine will be created, it will be in the West Bank and Gaza. That's the international community, that's the Arab world, and that's the Palestinian leadership, saying this is it. So what's left for us as Arab citizens? One of two options, the same two options that my grandfather's generation had. Stay and build your prosperity and development in the state of Israel. Aspire for political and social equality. Basically enhance your Israelization process. Or seek your Palestinization in the future Palestinian state. You want to be full Palestinian national, look for future Palestinian state, and consider moving to live there. Tzipi Livni even said to Arab citizens, anyone that wants to call themselves a Palestinian, you should move to live in a Palestinian state. And she's part of the center-left in Israel. So it's not only the discourse of the right wing, even the center-left liberal camp in Israel say, we're not willing to accommodate your identity as Palestinians. Actually, recently in January, 91% of Israelis say they refuse to hear the definition of Arab citizens as Arabs or Palestinians. You should come neutral in Israeli society, say I'm only Israeli. It's okay for them to say their identity is Jewish, but anyone who's not Jewish has to identify themselves as Israeli. One of the Arab members of the Knesset, Ahmad Tibi, once said, Israel defines itself as Jewish and democratic. And he elaborates, he says, it's Jewish towards the Arabs and democratic towards the Jews. Which basically puts the Arab citizens in a place they have to accept the dominance of the Jewish nature of the state of Israel to be allowed to live in the state of Israel. Now ask this question to Arab citizens, would you move to live in a future Palestinian state when or if it will be established? This question is often asked by Professor Sami Smoha from Haifa University. And he's been asking this question since 1978. Almost every year he comes back and asks this question. Almost 93% to 97% depends on when you ask, but the answer of no, we will not move to a future Palestinian state, 93 to 97% say no, we will not move. He asks secondary questions. Why? You're Palestinians, 60% of you say you're Palestinians, and we're going to offer you a Palestinian state. And they say, we're home, we're in our homeland, We don't feel strangers. We feel a sense of connectivity. And as such, we're not going to leave. But also, second answer would be, we're marginal in both societies. We've managed over the last few generations, 3-4 generations, to create our own uniqueness that we want to protect. As we do not want to assimilate in the Israeli society, we don't know what the future Palestinian state is going to look like and what it's going to demand from us. Is it going to be democracy? Can someone promise that? Is it going to be an Islamic state? Can someone promise that? Is it going to be an autocracy? Is it going to be a kingdom? No one knows. So we better gamble on what we know and not gamble on something completely unknown. Third answer, we've learned not just to be a community, but we also equipped ourselves with the tools for social economic mobility in Israeli society. We studied in Israeli universities. We equipped ourselves to the job market. And to find ourselves as refugees, even in a Palestinian state, will be a gamble. So there are also social economic considerations. We've paid our social security payments and to the Israeli government. So we should expect the payback from the Israeli government and not go and expect the Palestinian government that will get the money from the state of Israel. And maybe we see that money, your pension funds, maybe you'll see it or maybe you don't see it. So people simply don't want to gamble their future on a political entity that they don't know its future nature. And that's why they say, we're going to stay home. And we know there's that delta, that gap between Israel as a state of the Israelis versus the state of the Jewish people. And if we're going to forever be Israeli citizens, then let's challenge that delta. Let's teach Israel to become Israeli. And let us ourselves also learn how to be Israeli. At the same time, we don't want to miss our Palestinian duty. We owe our Palestinian people and our Palestinian identity a great deal. Maybe we start acting as diaspora Palestinians, meaning extend support for the Palestinian quest for freedom, end of occupation, statehood, in ways that do not affect our status too much. And this has come to few testing moments. So from one end, almost every Arab member of the Knesset speaks the language of the Palestinian leadership in the Knesset. End occupation, stop, end checkpoints, all the freedoms that the Palestinians are they're demanding are aired through the mouth of Arab members of the Knesset at the podium in the Knesset, which is part of the political re-Palestinization. We feel that we have a duty to try to defend the Palestinian needs using the space that we have in Israeli society. Although it comes at our expense very often. Because if you speak as a Palestinian, you get discriminated as a Palestinian also. So acting as with Palestinian national identity reflects on increasing the marginality in Israeli society, which seems to be a price that many Arab citizens are willing to pay. Ask Arab citizens, would you vote to a political party that does not put end of occupation in its platform? Only about 30% say yes. 70% will condition voting to a political party if that party has end occupation and creation of a Palestinian state as part of their agenda. But it comes like third or fourth priority. Priority one is personal safety. Arab citizens do not feel that they're safe, especially because of the very high crime rate resulting from police negligence, which does not treat crime and does not handle crime in the Arab community. Second priority is education. Third priority is employment. Fourth priority is housing. And the fifth priority comes the Palestinian issue. So people are very realistic. They want quality of life. But the fifth priority appears as critical priority when they come to vote. When they come to vote, if you drop the fifth priority, you're not going to get the vote of the Arab citizens. So the question is always, where are the limits of our re-Palestinization? In October 2000, the Arab citizens paralleled the Palestinian Intifada, the uprising, with an uprising in Arab towns and villages. It happened again in May 21. Everyone expected that it will happen also during this war. It's not happening. But going out to the streets and demonstrating against the occupation became an exercise, very frequent exercise, until the moment of 13 Arab citizens were killed. Then the Arab leadership in Israel, I would say, pulled the emergency brake. And they said, our support to the Palestinians ends at a certain limit. What's that limit? We do not import the Intifada-like mechanisms inside Israel. So yes, for political support in the Knesset or demonstrations, but don't turn them violent. Yes, for collecting food and medications, but not collecting arms. Trying to create a firewall between the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who are very legitimized in their resistance for occupation. So most Arab citizens will support any Palestinian act against occupation, whether it is attacks on settlements or attacks on soldiers, but they say it's not for us to do. Ask question, why? Why wouldn't you engage in that? And the answer is the day after. The day after the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's assumed that there will be a Palestinian state. And what Israel is negotiating now, hopefully will be negotiating with the Palestinians again, is an end of conflict that will result with a divorce agreement. In a divorce, you split the house, and everyone has clear sovereignty. The Palestinians will have sovereignty in a future Palestinian state. Israel will have sovereignty within its Green Line borders. And everyone knows where their interests start and end. While for Arab citizens, their day after is integration in Israeli society. If you don't want to move to live in a Palestinian state, it means you're going to be riding the same bus with Israeli Jews. It means you're going to go to the same university with Israeli Jews. It means you're going to go to the same shopping mall. You're going to go to the same workplace. And as such, the worry about the day after is controlling the acts of Arab citizens today in how much support we can provide to the Palestinians. So yes, in our town, on the end of August, there was a campaign to collect food and medications for the Palestinians in Gaza. And within 2 days, it's a town of 15,000 people, collected 74 truckloads of food and medications to the Palestinians in Gaza. So on the humanitarian side, people quickly did that. Politically, most people are afraid of even expressing support. And why? Because since October 7th, almost 1,200 Arab citizens have been arrested for expressing support for the Palestinians. Most of those arrests are arrests that are even sometimes illegal. That someone that puts out a photo of the destruction in Gaza and say, end the war. So if you're an Arab citizen that says that, you're subject for arrest. If you're a Jewish citizen, that's freedom of expression. So people are refraining from political things that might have some political nature. And even the donations that were collected were not collected by local Arab NGOs that were afraid of becoming a target of the Israeli government, especially this extreme right-wing government. They found an international American NGO that was the umbrella for this collection of the food. It's I would call it fear culture. I wrote an article about this in Haaretz in English. I called it even equivalent to McCarthyism. That what's happening under this government in oppressing the freedom of expression of Arab citizens is very much equivalent to McCarthyism and silencing. In the government authorities, they say they want to prevent potential explosion of another front between Israel and another Arab group. They have an explosion with the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, now in Lebanon, with the Houthis and Iran and the Iraqis. They want to control the relations inside Israel, which are even more sensitive because they are between people in the same floor, in the same elevator, in the same bus. So the tension there can be much, much more dangerous in the streets of Israeli society. It comes at the expense of limitation of Arab citizens, but it also comes at the expense of tension with the rest of the Palestinians, because they say you're not doing enough to support the Palestinians in one of their darkest moments. You're only doing it, you're only sending food and medications, and when 41,000 Palestinians, almost 42,000 Palestinians are being killed, all of Gaza has been demolished, and what do? You just send food. Is that Palestinianhood? Is that enough Palestinian national expression of your national identity? So again, going to the marginality also in the Palestinian national identity, when the rest of the Palestinians are in a fight, Arab citizens are choosing not to be in that fight. This does create tension. A recent study that I commissioned and published it also in January showed severe tension between Jewish and Arab citizens during time of crisis, like now. Before October 7th, almost 40% of Israeli Jews said that they have never visited an Arab town in Israel, and they have no intention of visiting an Arab town. Today, after October 7th, this percentage rose to 81%, more than double. Among Arab citizens, about 27% said they have no intention of visiting a Jewish town. It's what I call mutual communal boycott. Today, it's about 57%, also more than doubled. It's, I look at this as an increase of mistrust and mutual fear. In an increase of mistrust and mutual fear, who benefits? Who capitalizes on it? One, people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of Internal Security, who comes from a very extreme, radical, racist political party, and his partner, the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, that also called once for separate women in the hospitals so that Arab women and Jewish women will not be in the same floors, because once in maternity rooms, once they have babies, they should not sleep in the same floors, he says. That's the kind of segregation he wants to go that far. Luckily, the medical industry, the doctors said, not on our watch. Find yourself other doctors and other hospitals, not in the hospitals that we are working in. And that hospitals are what I call an island of success in Jewish-Arab relations, not on the political discourse, but on the horizontal discourse, not the vertical discourse, but the horizontal social economic discourse in Jewish-Arab relations. It's an island of success, one of many. One of them, what's the island of success? If you go to an Israeli hospital, although Arab citizens are 17% of the citizens, but they are 24% of the doctors, 36% of the dentists, 44% of the nurses, and 55% of the pharmacists. More than 1/3 of the medical industry are Arab citizens. How did that come about? Almost half of them got trained outside Israel, so it's despite the system, not thanks to the system. Families send their kids to study abroad, and if you send your kid to study abroad, you want them to come back with a profession, and not just a degree. Excuse me, the literature and science, social sciences people. You come back with a profession which the economy, the industry needs. And they figured that the medical industry will always be open for those skills, and they were right. They gambled on a skill that the Israeli Jewish community said we need, and they created space. Because if you need a doctor, you need a doctor. You don't ask them for their name. You need that, especially if it's an emergency type of medicine. By the way, this is beginning to happen in another island, which is the high-tech industry. In the high-tech industry, just 7 years ago, the percentage of Arab employees in high-tech industry was 1%. The Arab community was not there. They were not part of the big party in the Israeli economic arena. Today, the Arab citizens are 7%. The high-tech industry needs that hidden brain power because they need more employees. So they're investing in scholarships, in improving the quality of math education in Arab schools. And the percentage of Arab students in engineering schools is 23% in Israeli universities. Academia in general has also gone through a revolution over the last 2 decades. In 2003, the percentage of Arab students in Israeli universities was only 3.5%. Today, it's 20%. And they constitute only 2/3 of the Arab students. Almost 1/3 study in the West Bank and Gaza. So de facto, Arab citizens are 26% of the university student population, while being only 17% of the population. What does that mean? That the Arab community in Israel started internalizing the status of a minority. I would even dare say maybe eternal minority. And a minority knows that it needs to work hard. It needs to equip itself with tools that are essential for the larger society that will be forced to create a space for them. So Israeli society in high-tech, they say, yes, we want you, we need you, we'll even pay you 3 times average wage. Even if you're an Arab, even if you're not Jewish, we will give you that position. So what the Arab community does, it equips itself with that skill, with that tool. We send our kids to study more sciences so that they can compete in the Israeli job market. I keep saying to my kids, it's not good enough to be good. You have to be better than any Israeli Jewish candidate competing for the same job. And believe me, it's true, because in many incidents in their lives, as in my life, being good was not good enough. You always have to come with additional, extraordinary skills that make you a better candidate for a certain job. So sometimes the need, like in the medical industry, they need you and they grab you. But sometimes when they don't need you, they don't look at you. For example, in the finance industry. The finance industry in Israel is very much the old money families that hire themselves. The Arab citizens are not part of the old money. So we're only 1.5% of the finance industry, of the employees in the finance industry. We don't get access. Access is limited not to all Jews, but to certain groups in the Jewish community, and almost hermetically closed to the Arab community. You get a finance job only if you work in a bank that has a branch in your own town. But you never make it outside your town to a Jewish town or you don't have mobility, potential of mobility. I personally have been just look at the time, and that's what I was about to do. How much time we have?
Well, it's till 7.
Okay, so I will end with a few additional what I call islands of success that I've been involved in. The educational system is segregated in Israel. Segregated. Jews go to Jewish schools, and even in Jewish schools they have like 5 different educational streams, depends on your religiosity, and Arab citizens go to their own separate schools. And Professor Ephraim Yaar has an index, he calls it the racism index. It shows that more than 2/3 of the Jewish kids and about 2/3 of the Arab kids have racist views against each other. He says it's impacted by the segregation and the ecosystem of political tension. That some of it is the political tension coming from the Israeli-Palestinian cross-green line problem, or the internal tension of lack of equality between Jews and Arabs. That produces mutual racism between the two communities. In my organization at Givat Haviva, we run projects that bring Jewish and Arab youth together, and it takes 3 days to undo racism. After 3 days, only 12% of the participants are racists, not 65% of the kids. So you can unlearn racism through different types of mechanisms. Sometimes we call it peace education. More recently, we call it education for shared society. That's the new term that we're using. There are 162 organizations in this field. My organization, Givat Haviva, operates almost 70% of the volume of educational programs. One of the biggest projects we do is what we call cross-sector teachers program, placing Jewish teachers in Arab schools, Arab teachers in Jewish schools, to present a meaningful other in your life when you're growing up. And it also has fantastic impact. After 2 years, you see that racism and stereotypes drop dramatically as a result of having someone from the other side in your life. Some of the other projects that I'm dealing with is how do you bring down obstacles in front of Arab citizens to get government jobs in civil service, or get accepted to university, or get accepted to a job. Reduction of the norms of discrimination, most of it either de facto or institutional discrimination. So for example, I mentioned it even earlier today in a talk, the way you test students to enter university, you send them to take an exam, similar to SATs. In Israel, we call it psychometric exam. Until 2003, the exams were being in Hebrew only and not offered to Arab citizens in Arabic, although they study all the way through high school in Arabic. And then they get tested in their third language. And they were losing about 23% of their grade just because of the language. When we were able to convince the Board of Higher Education to test your intellectual capacity in your mother language, suddenly the gap is less than 2% between Jewish and Arab students, which means there are more qualified candidates to enter university. This is how one of the main reasons we were able to improve the percentage of Arab students from 3.5% in 2003 to almost 20% today by testing in optimal conditions for students so that they have equal access to the language of the exam. Also, we discovered another bug in exams of if you test students, Muslim students who are fasting, or Jewish students who might be fasting in Tisha B'Av or in Yom Kippur, if you test students who are fasting after 1 p.m., you're likely to lose 20% of your grade because of the sugar level in your blood and the liquid level in your system. You lose about 20% of your grade. So if you want to get the best out of your students during that month, you know they're fasting, test them in the morning hours. And this has become a norm actually in all Israeli universities. So we're in the business of finding those small solutions that can have a significant impact. One of the projects I also started in 2007 was how to fight poverty. And we found one of the problems. One of the problems was that Arab women were not working enough. Only 17% of Arab women worked in comparison to almost 78% of Jewish women. Ask why? Traditionally, Arab women worked in agriculture in their own lands. No more lands. They're not used to work outside their town. They're used to work inside their own community. The Arab community is institutionally poor, and the 20%, including East Jerusalem, 21%, produces only 13% of the jobs. So almost half of the manpower, female power, work power, whatever you want to call it, has to work in the Jewish population, in the Jewish communities, which means you need public transportation between Jewish towns and Arab towns, and not only public transportation which was culturally based. Public transportation was only between Arab towns themselves or Jewish towns themselves. So we needed to change the public transportation system so that Arab towns are connected to the nearby Jewish towns that has jobs. Then you need to improve the quality of Hebrew of those women. And you need to give them some basic skills of how to look for a job. Type your CV, so you need Word. Send it by email, you need Outlook. Search for a job on Google, you need to understand basic mostly office applications to be able to look for a job in the nearby Jewish town and not go to knock on a door in your own neighborhood to ask for a job. This is the traditional way of asking for a job. We've got to a fantastic result that in 2007 only 17% of Arab women worked. Today it's 46%. Poverty rate then was 67% of Arab citizens were below poverty line. Today it's about 47%. So there are some successes that you can create on the horizontal aspect of Jewish-Arab relations, that's social, economic. So politically, and I will end here, politically, I think we're experiencing a retreat, but socially, economically, I think there are lots of islands of success that are going forward for everyone's benefit. Thank you very much. I'm ending because time ended.
Yeah, I know, you could. Thank you so much for an excellent lecture.
The discouraging of any kind of narrative within Israel that contradicts or that is seen as somehow critical. But outside of Israel, when somebody who is Israeli comes to the United States, for example, and speaks, are there any ramifications that are possible because of that?
Yes. You know, you're always, there's always a watch. Many Arab, especially academics that studied abroad and got involved in pro-Palestinian protest movements, do not dare to come back. Almost half of our professors who are Arab citizens of Israel teach abroad. They chose to have a career abroad. It's part of the brain drain. Part of it is that they're afraid of not finding a job. Part of it is they're afraid they're not going to have, they might be punished for things that they've done outside Israel. And part of it is that they feel that they might not have enough freedom of expression when they're back as academics, back in Israel. So yes, it's you can get punished also for engaging in freedom of expression even outside the state of Israel.
So I have that question for you. I've been thinking about that. You're doing lots of freedom of expression here. Are you in danger of some kind? Do you worry about that? Does what you do, are you worried about that?
Actually, I'm not worried about that. I think I'm too old to worry about that. They can't get much from me if they try to do. Actually, I at some point a few months ago, I was in a severe debate with the Minister of National Security, Minister of Police Ben Gvir, and he even demanded that I be brought to court. I said, I wish I will be brought to court. I look for that moment. I don't think I'm breaking any law. I think it's that policy of silencing. I don't say anything which is not factual. And as such, I'm not worried. So I could be worried. I'm not worried about the legal aspect because I know I'm not breaking any laws. And I also think that I'm part of the construction of a better Israeli society and not part of the destruction of Israeli society. I look for ways to bring Jewish and Arab citizens together, socially, economically, culturally, but also politically. I'm glad I can say that I contributed very much to the inclusion of an Arab political party in the previous coalition, whether by encouraging more political participation of Arab citizens in the elections process, the turnout rate, to increase the turnout rate, but also the negotiations that took place between Yair Lapid and Mansour Abbas, the head of the United Arab List, which I was one of its founders. And luckily, that resulted with having the first Arab political party in an Israeli coalition ever. So I think it's for me. I'm not immune, but I think I've gathered enough of public presence that it will be difficult to take me to court because I know how to argue my case. And as I said, if they find me breaking any law, then please take me in. Until then, they will be the ones to be embarrassed.
You spoke a lot about discrimination, which I think, you've mentioned the Orr report, which, clearly discrimination, right, it exists. You mentioned that you did a lot of research into other minority groups. You mentioned a lot in Europe. I can imagine, minority groups in the United States, Native Americans, right, who have been discriminated against. I'm wondering, from your perspective and from your research, are Israeli Arabs, the community, is it somewhat in line with what happens in lots of other countries to minority groups, or is it distinctly different? Without saying that anybody should have discrimination, right? Yeah.
It is similar to experiences of many national groups in the world. It took the German-speaking minority in South Tyrol from the First World War until 2010 to figure out their status in Italy. So, generations. It took the Sinti Roma, which used to be called Gypsies in Germany, 600 years to get recognized as a national minority in Germany. So there's no clear sequence of how much time does it take until you overcome discrimination and you start becoming a mainstream in society. I read a lot of literature about discrimination against the Jews in the United States, that just maybe a couple of generations ago, when people used to say Jew, they used to spit on the other side. And today the Jewish community is considered to be part of the American elite. It's being celebrated in many places in American society. Yes, maybe there's still pockets of racism and discrimination, anti-Semitism, but they're considered to be a national asset for most of the groups in American society. And that's a place that I aspire for the Arab communities, to become a national asset. So medically, we are a national asset. Give us another generation in the engineering industry, we will be a national asset. It will be difficult to continue institutional discrimination if you are an asset to society. So that's why I say I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. I think that we're suffering today, but under two conditions, things will be okay. One is resolve the Israeli-Palestinian cross-border conflict, so that our mom and dad are not fighting anymore. So we don't have to choose sides and say, prove your allegiance. I want to have allegiance to both sides that live in peace, even if it means that they live in this divorce situation. So I can fulfill my rights, full rights as citizens, but also as fulfill my full capacity as Palestinian national, so I can engage in Palestinianhood completely and not feel that this negates my Israeli interest. The second is capacity building. We need to build capacity. Well, I don't want to be the lower income population that comes for welfare. I don't want that. I want to be able to say, you need us. And when we ask for equality, it's eye-level equality. And as such, we need to work harder. Still, there are some minorities around the world that did not ask this for themselves, did not demand this from themselves. And they like the being, maybe forced, stuck in a place of being on the receiving end. And I think that maybe because we're part of a regional majority, we don't feel the inferiority. We don't have the inferiority complex. Many minorities internalize as a minority the inferiority complex. Maybe because we're part of a larger culture. We're part of the regional Middle Eastern Muslim Arab majority. We don't feel an inferiority complex. We feel our identity as complete, rich. Our language is as healthy as it can be. Our music is as healthy as it can be. Our kitchen and gourmet food is as healthy as it can be. Our drama and television, we have a healthy national ego as Palestinian Arabs. We're not lacking that, and as such, I think we can compete in Israeli society. We need equal opportunities that do not keep pushing us down, but we can compete, one, if we work harder, and second, if the political ecosystem will create that peace between our state and our people.
I have two questions. The first is, do you know what the percentage of Palestinians are on the faculties of universities?
About 5%.
And the second one was, when I was in Israel a few years ago, I was talking to somebody from East Jerusalem who said it was much more women than men who were going on to university.
Just to be on the record, it's a percentage of Arab faculty members in Israeli universities is about 5% only. That's still an arena that we need to improve. Most of it is obstacles and not capacity, because capacity is actually traveling outside Israel and not staying in Israel. The good news is that the increase in the Arab student population, which was 3.5% in 2003 and today is 20% of Israeli university students, is mostly female, about 72% female, 28% male population. This gets a bit balanced when you look at the gender of the Arab students in the West Bank and in Europe. It's mostly male. So many of our male students study abroad in the West Bank and in Europe. Most of the females are studying in Israel. So if you combine our students that study abroad with those that study in Israeli universities, it's about 60% or 58% female, 42% male population. But this is a tremendous progress in society. In 2003, less than 20% of our student population was female, and in Israeli universities today, 72% is a huge success for our society, for our women. It improves the educational level in the household. It creates capacity, economic capacity for those women. Hopefully it will get represented also in political leadership in the future, much more significant political and social leadership in the future. Today, 80% of our teachers are female teachers. Just 20 years ago, it was 80% male teachers. So it changes also society, the makeup of society. It is part of the modernization / Israelization process, which I mentioned started in the 60s. With women, it's coming to this peak moment right now in academia. But I think that it will reflect itself also in other arenas in society. It comes with the side effects, as in every good medication. So one of the side effects is very high rise of divorce rate, which has more than doubled in one generation. Now it's about 40%. It was 20% just a generation ago. And maybe it's bad marriages that shouldn't continue. But it means that the social fabric in society is not the same as the social fabric as 20 years ago, as a result of different capacities of women that should not be in an abusive relationship.
Thank you so much for giving 2 lectures today and spending time with so many of our students earlier. So we really appreciate and everything you're doing to promote equality within Israel as well. So thank
Equality
you.
and good relations.
Yeah,
That's why I call it
equality.
shared society.
Yes.
It's a combination of these 2 components.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me.